The London air was crisp and bitter as winter descended on the city, a constant reminder that the world was shifting toward the colder months. The crowds outside Buckingham Palace were ever present, tourists with their eager eyes and cameras, all waiting to catch a glimpse of the royal guard, as they stood stoic and unyielding in their duties. The guards, in their iconic red tunics and towering bearskin hats, had become a living symbol of the monarchy's enduring presence, their discipline unmatched by any civilian force. And for the tourists, they were a spectacle, a curiosity, something to admire, photograph, and maybe poke fun at in the fleeting moments before moving on. Most people saw them only as statuesque figures, unblinking and unwavering in the face of all that was thrown at them. Among the crowd that morning was a woman named Evelyn Kingsley. She was the epitome of wealth and privilege. She had lived a life that was unimaginable to most, a life shaped by the kind of wealth that insulated her from the harsh realities of the world. She moved through life with the kind of effortless grace that only those born into riches could ever truly possess. Her fur coat shimmered in the sunlight, the fur trimmed in white, glinting with gold as she walked. She wore diamond earrings the size of small stones, and her long manicured fingers twirled a pearl-encrusted handbag like it was a trophy. Her every step radiated superiority, her eyes cold and calculating as they scanned the people around her. She wasn't here to admire the monarchy or take in the history of Buckingham Palace. No, Evelyn had a different agenda altogether. She was here to prove something, to show her dominance, to humiliate, and to assert her authority. As Evelyn approached the royal guard stationed near the gates, she saw what she had come for. A young man, no older than 30, stood in his post with his eyes locked straight ahead. His posture was perfect, a statue in human form. His uniform was immaculate, his bearskin hat towering above him as though it could block out the entire world. But Evelyn wasn't impressed. To her, this man was no more than an instrument of the monarchy, a cog in a machine that had little meaning to someone like her. She couldn't fathom the idea that he might have a life, a soul, or any reason to stand there, beyond being paid to do so. She had always thought herself above everyone, a woman of power and influence, untouchable by the lives of commoners. As she stood before the guard, she couldn't help but smirk. "Do you even have a soul behind that uniform?" she sneered, making sure to speak loud enough for the people around her to hear. "Or are you just a puppet of the monarchy, standing there like an idiot?" Her words hung in the air like a challenge, a taunt. She could feel the eyes of the surrounding tourists now focused on her, some of them exchanging nervous glances. But Evelyn didn't care. She was used to attention, used to having people fawn over her. This was no different, except now she had an opportunity to prove just how much control she had. She wanted to break him, to force him to react, to show the world that no one was beyond her reach. The guard did not flinch. He remained as still and unmoving as the stone walls behind him. His face was an unreadable mask, his eyes fixed straight ahead, as though Evelyn's words meant nothing. But Evelyn wasn't done. No, she would press further. She took a few steps closer, her heels clicking on the pavement, drawing even more attention. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" she spat, her voice rising with scorn. "You think just because you wear that ridiculous uniform and stand in front of a palace, you're above us. You and your pathetic little life, living in service. Do you even know what it means to have power? To have money? To have the world at your feet?" The crowd fell silent for a moment as Evelyn's words cut through the air. Some of the tourists looked uncomfortable, unsure of whether they should intervene, but no one dared speak up. It was as though they were waiting for the guard to snap, to react in some way. But still, he didn't. Evelyn took another step forward, emboldened by the tension in the air. She could feel her pulse quicken, knowing that this was her moment. She was in control. The guard had no power here, not in the face of her wealth and status. And then, in an act that stunned everyone around her, Evelyn spat directly into the guard's face. The crowd gasped in unison, some people pulling out their phones to record the moment. Evelyn stood there with her hands on her hips, a smug smile forming on her lips. She had done it. She had crossed the line and forced him to acknowledge her, to react. But what happened next was not what she had expected. The royal guard, without so much as a flicker of emotion, wiped his face slowly with a cloth he kept in his pocket. His movements were precise and deliberate, as though nothing in the world could disturb his composure. He didn't shout. He didn't move a muscle in anger. He simply stood there, wiping his face clean with the same quiet dignity he had carried before. For a brief moment, Evelyn felt her heart skip a beat. She had expected him to lash out, to yell at her, to somehow retaliate. But instead, there was nothing. No response. And then, the guard spoke. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm and steady, carrying the weight of authority without a hint of malice. You've just insulted the honor of this uniform, of this institution, and of the men and women who serve this country. But you know what? I won't let your actions define me, nor my duty. My response is not to your cruelty, but to my own purpose." Evelyn froze, her breath caught in her throat, and for the first time in a long while, she felt something she wasn't used to: confusion. The tourists around her were silent, watching this unexpected exchange unfold. They had been expecting some kind of scandal, some kind of outrage, but here was this man, standing before them as unshaken as ever, his composure only further proving his strength. Evelyn had thought herself to be the one in control. She had come here to show him who was in charge, to break him with the force of her words, her wealth, her power. But this man, this soldier, had done something that Evelyn couldn't understand. He hadn't flinched, he hadn't retaliated, he had simply stood his ground, his sense of duty far stronger than anything she could throw at him. The royal guard turned his head slightly, his eyes still fixed ahead. His posture didn't change. "Goodbye, ma'am," he said softly, almost as an afterthought. "I won't waste any more of my time with you." Evelyn stood there dumbfounded. She had insulted him, humiliated him in front of the crowd, and yet he had dismissed her as though she were nothing more than a fleeting annoyance. The crowd began to murmur, a few people exchanging glances. Some shook their heads in disbelief, while others whispered in awe of the guard's composure. Evelyn's world, her carefully constructed world of privilege, of power, of wealth, began to feel a little smaller, a little more hollow. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her throat was dry, her heart heavy with a strange weight she couldn't explain. She had been so sure of herself, so certain that her money and status could command respect. But here, in the face of this man's quiet dignity, her wealth meant nothing. Evelyn took a few steps back, her eyes now on the guard, who stood unmoving, his back straight and his gaze still focused ahead. For the first time, she saw him not as a uniform, not as a symbol of the monarchy, but as something far more. She saw him as a man with purpose, with strength, with pride in something far greater than himself. She had wanted to break him, but instead, she had been broken. As Evelyn turned and walked away, she couldn't help but feel the weight of her actions. In her pursuit of dominance, she had encountered something far more powerful than she could ever have imagined. The royal guard had shown her, in his silence, the true meaning of strength, the ability to remain unshaken, to hold fast to one's principles, and to stand in the face of cruelty without ever losing one's composure. And in that moment, Evelyn Kingsley learned a lesson she would never forget.